Okay. Bring that closer, I guess. Yeah, with all the previous speakers, though, I don't want to get like weird diseases and shit. No. So.
After last night's party, it's probably a little bit too late for that.
Yeah, good point. Well, I mean, it's all itchy.
Hey, you know, there's some drugs in Tijuana you can buy that actually will cure most of that. Get rid of the rash, too.
Well, I'll cancel my flight tomorrow and go down.
Okay, good.
Best talk ever!
All right, so Tom St. Denis is up here to talk to you now, and he has actually, usually we're used to authors that are a bit full of themselves, so kind of used to seeing people that have bios that are rather large, but Tom takes the cake in the relationship between his bio and the entire description of his talk. What is it, 5 words to talk, but I guess that's what he's going to spend the next 50 minutes discussing, explaining to you exactly what he means by elliptical curve cryptography, Redux. I can't even say it. It's late. I'm tired. But Tom, everyone, big round of applause for him.
All right, so I'm Tom St. Denis, obviously. The talk is Elliptic Curve Cryptography Redux. So it's kind of a survey talk on ECC. I won't go too in depth. It's kind of light, enjoyable, whatever. I'm pretty much one of the sole authors of the series of libtom projects. So if you Google for libtomcrypt, you'll pretty much see what I'm about. Anyways. Quick disclaimer, because I had to do this earlier. I work for AMD. I don't represent them when I'm doing this. So don't go to them saying some weird guy went on stage and all that stuff. I'll be talking about some patents as well, but I'm not an attorney, so don't quote me. I just did a quick, US patent search. That's about it. So take everything with kind of a grain of salt. This is my second Toorcon talk. Love the scene. It's cool. Basically, I spend my time dividing it between crypto, doing research and studying and reading any type of paper I get my hands on, development stuff, libtomcrypt, giving talks like this one, and authoring books. So I have my first book here, if you guys want to see it after the talk. And I'll have another book coming out in about November, so you should all buy it. Never worked for Advia, but that's kind of a Dan joke. Author of the libtom projects. I have a new website, so anyone who's known about my projects before, they were hosted at libtomcrypt.org. Dan forgot to re-register that, so there's now a squatter sitting on libtomcrypt.org. I have libtomcrypt.com now. I have briefly been dragged into the One Laptop Per Child project, securing their bias so they can do updates and not get completely pwned. But I'm not a core member of that project, so I'm just kind of, tagging along. Books, and of course I'm doing everything else. So for those who don't know, I came here with an EFF hat, and it's sunny in San Diego, so you need a hat. Dan borrowed it and managed to lose it, and it's kind of a weird, funny story. But anyways, I just put that up to embarrass him a bit. Okay, so let's get into the actual talk. Okay, so we're going to be looking at elliptic curve cryptography. So I'm assuming a lot of people here probably know about RSA, that type of asymmetric crypto. You know about things like AES, SHA-1, SHA-256, all that stuff. Very few people actually really understand what elliptic curve crypto means, specifically because it deals with a lot of weird algebra that for new people, like when I started going into it, it's really awkward and just horrible to think about. So I'll talk about that. We'll talk about why they're useful. So why do we even want to look at this if we already have RSA? We're looking into how we do encryption with this. So this is asymmetric encryption, public key encryption. How do we do signatures with them? What standards are out there that cover each? What type of curves do we have? And you probably won't know what a curve means at this point, but there are standard curves as well we'll be using. And I'll briefly touch on patents, copyrights, and all that other jazz, very briefly. And then finally, I'll end the talk discussing a cool algorithm that I developed a couple months ago. Gets really cool performance for ECC work. And this is not a libtomcrypt talk, unlike last year. So essentially, an elliptic curve is defined by the root polynomial. So the basic form, for those who can see it, y squared equals x cubed plus ax plus b. And then there's a more generalized form, the Weierstrass form. And from that, you can pretty much describe any elliptic curve you want to look at, not just crypto-related ones. A point is a pair of x, y that satisfies that equation. Pretty simple. The order of a curve is the number of pairs that satisfy the equation. And that comes into particular use when we're elliptic curves defined over finite fields. So we're not going to be dealing with real numbers or rationals or whatever. We're going to be dealing with, say, arithmetic modulo a prime, for example. So the gist of elliptic curves, that's what it looks like. These are two different forms over the reals. Pretty simple objects. So all those little red parts are points. Yay. So when we're getting into elliptic curve crypto, we have to define two primitive operations that we can use to work with points on a curve. So all our operations are being done with points, whereas in something like RSA or typical Diffie-Hellman, we're dealing only with integers. So that's kind of where the first step into weirdness begins. The two operations we're going to be looking at are point addition and point doubling. And from that, we can define elliptic curve crypto. So point addition is where you have 2 points and you want to add them together. This operation is completed by finding a line through the 2 points and find out where it intersects the curve. Point doubling is simply taking the tangent of the point. So I have pretty pictures to show this off. So this is point addition. So we're going to be adding P to Q, and we get R as a result. When you actually complete the point addition, you actually use the negative value of R. So it'll be the R that's below the x-axis. And the reason you do that is if you added Q to R, you would get P back, which isn't really a useful operation. You want to get a different result from that. And then point doubling, here's doubling Q to get P. So quite simply, it's just the tangent to the curve and where it hits. Really simple. So why do we care about addition and point doubling? It seems like a really weird operation to do. Well, from this, we can define point multiplication. And from that, we can get Diffie-Hellman DSA. So point multiplication is simply the practice of adding a point to itself multiple times. In this notation here, you'll see there's uppercase variables and lowercase variables. The uppercase variables will be points. So G is a point on the curve. It's an XY pair. Whereas K is a scalar, an integer, 5, 7, whatever. So when we say K, we're doing a point multiplication. So in this case, we're adding G to itself K times. From this, we can construct any point multiplication. So for example, if we wanted to find the value of 3G, we would double G and add G to it. If we wanted 5G, we'd do 2 doublings and an add, so on and so forth, like we do exponentiation with RSA. And in fact, a lot of the algorithms we use to do fast exponentiation, so RSA and Diffie-Hellman, you can take those and map them onto ECC pretty well. So now we have a trapdoor. If I give you the value of y, which is kg, and you know g but not k, finding k is hard. And this is the trapdoor we're going to be taking advantage of. It's similar to this discrete logarithm trapdoor. So you have y equals g to the power of x mod p. So I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with that particular trapdoor, right? OK, so from this, we can start Diffie-Hellman key sharing. Alice has a public key, which is uppercase A times equal to AG. Bob has a public key, which is uppercase B. In this case, G is a publicly known base point that everyone starts from. So these are parts of standards that I'll get into briefly. From these two public values, though, they can share a key or share a point that no one else can compute, which is simply lowercase a, uppercase b, which is equal to abg. Or on the other flip side, you'll have lowercase b, uppercase a, which is bag. And since this is a group operation, abg and bag are the same point. And now they have a shared secret. Usually what will happen from this is you'll take the x coordinate and ignore the y and hash it and use that as a shared secret. You don't use the y value because if you looked at the graph earlier, there's only 2 values of y for any given value of x. So there's only 1 bit of entropy in it. It's not very useful to use it. It doesn't really add to the security of anything. So why are you, did I go too far? No, okay. Why is ECC in any way useful? It seems like kind of interesting math, but why would you be doing this? Well, it turns out ECC parameters can be a lot smaller than RSA parameters for a given level of security. In RSA, we can use algorithms like the generalized number field sieve to factor in a sub-exponential amount of time. Whereas in ECC, you don't have that advantage in attacking it. So it's fully exponential. So if you say you want 80 bits of security, with RSA, you have to use 1,000-bit numbers. Whereas in ECC, you only have to use 160-bit numbers. We're going to be using less memory to do this, obviously, because the numbers are smaller. And there's various other tricks to compress it, too. So there's point compression on public keys, but that's not important. You transmit less data, which is important. So a brief example of that would be ECDSA signature with 80 bits of security is 48 bytes with ECC, or it's 128 bytes with RSA. So you're already less than half the size. And you also get a lot of speed out of this. Since you're dealing with small numbers and there's tons of fast algorithms, which I'll be presenting or talking about briefly, you can get ECC crypto on small devices. So anyone here ever work with an ARM, PowerPC, MIPS, whatever? Of course. So, of course, Greg. So a lot of companies that I've had dealing with, but I won't go into public stuff, but they just assume that if we can't do it, we'll do it insecurely. So we'll use 512-bit RSA or 300-bit RSA, and the average person will never look at that. And of course, people like, for example, in the back there, are the people who will look at that. So we can use ECC, use small numbers, but actually have real security, and we can fit them on stupid devices like Bluetooth mice or Bluetooth keyboards or Game Boys or whatever. We can also sign with it. So I briefly mentioned Diffie-Hellman, but we can also sign with it. Keep that in mind as the talk progresses. So stop for a second. Things I've learned at Toorcon so far. Headwear and Dan is a bad idea. And then, yeah, some stuff about the dance. You can see the slides later. Okay, let's get back into encryption here. What happens at Toorcon stays at Toorcon. Given Bob's public key, BG, we can encrypt. And we don't have to have, we don't have to know each other ahead of time to do this encryption. So it's not just a shared secret like Alice and Bob who know each other already, but if I have your public key, I can send something to you if you've never met me. And this is how you do it. Essentially, you just make up a random key, and that's where you're going to be sending to Bob. So you pick a random value of R, and I kind of stressed random. It's very important. A lot of Diffie-Hellman, straight-up Diffie-Hellman systems have been broken because they use things like the RAND function to get this random parameter. And anyone here should know that RAND is not exactly what you'd call a cryptographic random number generator. We take the point RBG, hash the X value, and use that as either a symmetric key or we can XOR it against the symmetric key that we want to choose. The payload. We send the ciphertext in RG to Bob. RG is effectively just a public key at this point. It would be what you would have in the first place if you knew each other ahead of time. On the other side, he then computes BRG from RG you gave him, recovers the symmetric key, and can decrypt the ciphertext. Yay. Signatures. So the first thing I say about signatures is follow standards. When I first implemented this stuff in my libtomcrypt library, I didn't really know about ECDSA because I'm not really a big fan of ANSI standards. They kind of annoy me. So I went off and implemented my own DSA variant, which was, it looked all nice, it worked and everything, and it was completely insecure. So I'm here to tell you, do ECDSA properly. X963 is the ANSI standard that covers it. I think it's finished now, but when I read it, it was a draft, so it's kind of, a work in progress. But the algorithms in it are pretty easy to implement. It's just a pretty much standard straight-up DSA. We'll see it in a second. And it's actually what NIST is specifying for EC signatures. So let's get with the signature here. We say we have a public key A and the private key A, lowercase a, and then times G, whatever. And we assign a message, MSG. So we'll hash it, get the parameter E, which is just an integer at this point, choose a random K, compute T equals KG, and then from this we'll get the R parameter of the DSA signature, which is just the X coordinate of our random point order of the curve. Right, 1 second. And then from that, after that, we'll get the S parameter, which is just, I don't know if it's really important that I read it out loud, but you get the S parameter from the random K you chose and their private key and the hash, and you send off to the user R and S. So R and S are integers about the size of the curve. So if you're talking about 192-bit ECC, these are 192-bit parameters. So your entire signature is 384 bits. It has 80 bits of, at that point, about 90 bits of security, and it'd be about the same as RSA 1024, except about half the size. To verify, it's pretty easy. We compute two values, U1 and U2. U1 is just E over S, so E is the hash of the message over the S parameter they gave you. U2 is R over S, and R and S are what the signature actually is. And then from that, we do a two-point multiplications, an addition, and we do a comparison. I work at the math on the slide, but I'm not going to read it out here because we want to save some time. But if you guys want to check it out later, it's there. It's also in my libtomcrypt libraries. That's another good, if you like C source code over English. So if the values compare, your signature is valid. If not, then all bets are off. There's 3 standard bodies that discuss ECC crypto. NIST kind of just packages up things they find. So they specify 5 prime fields, 5 binary field curves. Don't really worry what that means. It's just 2 different ways of doing, it's 2 different representations for the math, sort of. The Suite B stuff, if you ever heard of the NSA Suite B ECC crypto, that's the prime field curves from NIST. The prime fields are nice in software, which is why a lot of people like me, for example, dig them. You're using things that the processors will have, so an integer multiplier, an integer addition, so on and so forth. The binary fields are better for hardware because you're going to be doing weird things like binary field multiplication, which is not something the average CPU has, so it's pretty slow. It can be done, like OpenSSL, for example, was one of the first public libraries that had ECC in it, and they did binary field curves first. It can be done fast. It can be done faster in RSA, which is nice, but I like prime field better. NIST doesn't standardize much on Diffie-Hellman and DSA. They pretty much just refer to ANSI and say, whatever ANSI's doing this week, it's good for us too. And then ANSI went out and they wrote 2 specs. X962, which is Diffie-Hellman and key storage, and X963, which is ECDSA. The key storage in X962, so if you see the comment there, it's utter crap. They have a way of representing their keys that's not uniquely decodable. So I can hand you a blob, and you won't know what curve it belongs to, or any of the like sizing parameters, or anything like that. So it's just 2 numbers concatenated together with anything else. Whereas X963, you send that 1, which is a standard way of encoding data, so that's uniquely decodable. I can hand you anything in ASN1, you can figure out what it is. The ANSI specs aren't free. I managed just to get myself a draft copy off some weird Chinese website or something. The way it should be, right? Why would I pay them? And very few applications actually comply with X962. At the time when I was reading up on it, it was a draft. So obviously, any company that was really working on it would be still, in development. Obviously, it wouldn't be public at that point. And in particular, my approach for things like key storage, I just use ASN1. And if my users really want to be X962 compliant or whatever, they can sort it out on their own. They're not paying me, so what do I care? The IEEE standard P1363, again, isn't free. It's really redundant because you have ANSI and IEEE kind of dueling banjos with elliptic curve. And IEEE is more restrictive, and if you're not a big organization, it's more expensive to deal with. And generally, for people like me, I learned how to do ECC just from random papers on the web, books, stuff like that. And the standard body wasn't useful for me at all. So, just ignore them. The NIST curves, the prime field ones, go 192 bits through 521 bits to deal with the key sizes that AES supports, so 128 through 256, and the SHA sizes. They use I don't know how to read this comment here. They use a style for their modulus, which is known as diminished radix. Basically, they're trying to make the math a little faster. Nothing really in particular there. All the curves have prime orders, which is useful. So for those who know how to implement Diffie-Hellman, for example, your subgroups have to be prime order for security reasons and all that. And in this case, the NIST standard or NIST curves do that as well. So the NIST curves all have prime orders, so you don't have to worry about that. And at the bottom, there's an example. That's P192. So that's the parameters, the prime, the order of the curve, and the base point, whatever. I'm, again, not going to read that aloud. So let's move into patents. Everyone loves patents. And my talk. There we go. So Certicom is kind of the patent whore of ECC. And they're the people I love to pick on because they don't know what they're talking about, but they love to talk about it. So they have a series of patents that cover everything from how to what to implement, when to implement it, and all that stuff. And they're not very original, but it's because they're a small-minded group and everything. So I listed off a couple of their patents that I found were totally funny. The first being a crypto ALU. So this is basically your standard issue ALU, execution ports, register file, sequencer, all that jazz. And apparently, because you do a polynomial multiplication in it, it's now something you can patent. And then they have a couple others like that, and a multiplication patent and all that. Long story short, you're doing Suite B style ECC. So this is prime field curves. You're more or less safe. So I already picked on the ALU. So the classes of their patents, if you ever want to get into implementing this stuff, follows along the lines of power-sensitive work, hardware designs, signature and encryption, and the actual math that goes into implementing this. The power-sensitive side is things like differential power analysis and static power analysis, so DPA, SPA, resistance. for side channel attacks where you'll have a device that leaks a certain amount of information through the current it draws or the heat it generates. They're easy to avoid because they're very specific designs. They're good to know about, though, because they give you tips on how to implement it yourself. Their hardware patents cover things like their ALUs and their multipliers, but the designs themselves are pretty much, textbook at this point, so the validity of their patents is kind of in question. They have an algorithm called MQV. It's the initials of the authors of the algorithm, I believe. And it's an authenticated encryption algorithm. Basically, it does signatures and encryption all in one step. It's not part of the ANSI standards. So if you have to do signature encryption, just use Diffie-Hellman and DSA. It is part of Suite B, though. So that's kind of a hazard. If you want to actually be compliant with the NSA Suite B protocol, you'll have to actually have an MQV license if you don't fall under the NSA umbrella for that. The math stuff, mostly it touches on the binary curves, which is another reason why I avoid them. They have various representations that I won't go into, but that's where their patents fall. If you avoid binary fields, you're all set. And of course, if you're paranoid, you can do things like I did. Become a public domain hippie. I give everything out for free, and like hell, they're going to sue me. And they haven't yet, and I've been doing this for 5 years, so I guess it does work. And the other way is just to avoid the specific algorithms they have patents on. You can do that and still be compliant with the NIST and the ANSI. So if you have to market crypto out there, you can still do it safely. On the copyright front, Certicom does have their standard issue ECC library, but you don't have to use it, and in fact, you should use mine. But now there's two. So there's libtomcrypt that supports DSA and Diffie-Hellman. Yeah, I won't read that part, but you can see it. But I have the essentially Suite B minus MQV. So the code is well documented. It's pretty fast, too, as we'll see shortly. It's free for all purposes. It's worth looking at, even if you just want to learn about the math. It's a good resource, I think. Of course, I wrote it, but if you don't want to take my word for it, there's other crypto libraries out there, like Crypto++ by WeDie, and he implements the binary field side of things, and I think he does touch on Prime, but I don't know off the top of my head. The collection of source code in Crypto++ is copyrighted as a whole, but the individual components are free to use for any purposes whatsoever. They're kind of public domain that way. So if you rip code out of Crypto++, you're pretty much safe. But he doesn't really go after people to use it anyways. He wants people to use it, which is nice. And it also delivers a mighty blow of justice to the commercial world. And if you really want to get onto the devious side, you can find copies of BSafe. They started getting into ECC and what have not, and pick on them a bit. Or if you want to get historical, you can look for RSA ref and just laugh at that code because it's pretty horrible. They wrote it. Back up a bit. RSA ref, it was RSA's way of saying RSA is really, my talk here where I'm talking about ECC is what RSA did in the 90s to say RSA is really easy, except their source code looked like it was written by the average 12-year-old. So it was slow and horrible, and things like OpenSSL were way faster even back then. So them being the leaders of RSA was kind of awkward for that. So let's get into some math before we wrap up this talk. There's still like 10 slides up, whatever. So we want to point multiply. We want to do efficient point multiplication because point multiplication is what we base our signatures and encryption off of. And we want to do it efficiently and fast, obviously, so we can use less power and get things done quicker. To do this, it usually involves the first thing you want to do is make your point addition and your point doubling fast. So what we're going to do here is you're going to use different algorithms for that. So the standard textbook way, what you would do using only high school algebra is what's known as affine mathematics, where you'd find the slope of the line or the slope of the tangent, plug that into an equation, figures out for the x-coordinate. Unfortunately, while this is accurate, very compact code, it's slow because you have what's known as an inversion. An inversion is simply a mathematical way of saying you're going to 1 over x. So usually in finite fields, you don't have a division algorithm. You find the inverse and multiply out. Inversion is very, very slow. On most platforms, you can multiply an equal size number about 20, anywhere basically from 8 to 20 times faster than finding the inverse. So we want to in this operation. So a basic point add is 1 square, so the s there is a square, m is multiply, and I is inverse. Point addition is only one of each. So you think there's only 3 operations, that must be fast. No. Point doubling is basically the same thing. There's 2 squares, a multiply, and inverse. If we based ECC today off using affine systems, you might as well use RSA because it'll be faster, even for numbers that are 8 times smaller. Inverse is just that bad. So what instead is use what's known as projective coordinates. And without getting super hot on the math, basically you're projecting it onto 3 space. And we're going to do point addition and point doubling with more basic squaring and multiplication steps, but no inversions. And in this case, point addition is 8 multiplications and 3 squarings, no inversion. And point doubling is 4 multiplications and 4 squarings. It may seem like more work, but it isn't. So the basic multiplication is the same way you do RSA or Diffie-Hellman. So you'd have a simple multiply and square algorithm. You'd be inserting 1 bit at a time of the exponent into the final result. It's very simple. It's complexity efficient. So if you have very little space to code things in, it's what you want to do. But it's still very, very slow. Bad. So the next step up is to do what's known as a sliding window. And again, this is an algorithm you do with RSA. And essentially what we're doing here is we're going to be doing the same amount of doubles, but we're going to group up additions into one step by looking through a table. So instead of adding, depending on whether 1 bit is set, we'll add a different value based on, say, 4 bits of the multiplicand. It's slightly more complex, but it's a lot faster. And if you have the RAM to fit it, it's good. So can we do better than simple sliding windows? And it turns out the answer is yes. And I do have graphs to prove it. Yes. These are other point multiplication algorithms, but since we're running out of time, I'll skip over that. So basic fixed point, I'll try to go quickly through this, is say you want to multiply that 16-digit number that probably no one past the 3rd row can read. You want to multiply that by your basic G point. So I broke it up into 4 groups of 4 bits, because what I'm going to be using here is known as a 4-bit window for the fixed point multiplication. So what we do is we pre-compute a table where we fill in the 4 bits, if you can see it. So there's a whole bunch of zeros, then an X, and then a whole bunch of zeros, and another X, and what have not. We have basically 4 digits with the lower bit set. We step through all 16 possible values of those 4 bits, pre-compute the value. Since the base point there is your public key or the NIST point, we already know what G is. And then we can put that aside. So we can pre-compute that anytime, store it aside, use it for later. Now, to do the actual point multiplication, again, using the value at the top there, what we do is we look at the 4 groups of 4 bits, and we take the top bit, the most significant bit of each one. And in this case, it's going to turn into be the bold underline number in the bottom row here, if you can see it. So in this case, 100, or yeah, 1 3 zeros. We take that value, the 4 bits there, plug it into our table, and store that as our initial result. So now we have a starting point to do the rest of the point multiplication from. The next step, we double that. So now we look up and store, and then double it. And then the next step is we look at the most significant bit, so the 3rd bit in each group of 4. Add that to our current result, double it, rinse and repeat. You do that 4 times, and now you've done a point multiplication. This seems really complicated, probably because most people can't read it, but once you get the slides, it'll probably make a little bit more sense. And although it seems really complicated and an awkward way of doing point multiplication, it's actually very fast. Because what we're doing here is we're going to be adding W bits of what we're trying to multiply in each step. So with a point double, or the basic point multiplication algorithm, you're going to, sorry, I jumped ahead of myself there. Say we're doing a 192-bit ECC operation, a point multiplication. The basic algorithm for point multiplication would involve 192 point doubling operations and 96 point addition steps. Whereas if we use this fixed point with a 4-bit window, we're going to be doing 48 doubles and 48 adds. So we do half as many adds and a quarter as many doubles. So it's a pretty simple operation. And okay, so this table now, that's going to be taking up space. So people who work with embedded systems, we know that space is at a premium. You know, if you had 4K to implement ECC, usually that's pretty much all you have. And it turns out, though, even with small tables, you can make a lot of progress. So in this 4-bit window case, you have 16 values, and there's 16 points, obviously. So what is a point? Well, a point is just an x, y on the curve. It's 48 bytes for 192. So we have 16 times 48 bytes, which is less than a k. So with less than a k, we can get nearly 4 times the speed. Jump over that. You guys can ask me. So results. Everyone loves numbers. And I have graphs right after this. So with the basic algorithm, the sliding algorithm for P192, a point multiplication on an Opteron processor takes about 1.4 million cycles. A fixed-base approach, fixed-base approach with a 4-bit window takes 600K cycles. So we're nearly at a third there, and we're using less than 4 kilobytes of memory. It's pretty cool. Well, using 4 kilobytes of memory if you're using a standard math library. If you actually optimize it for size, you can get that way down. An 8-bit window gets us 400K cycles. A 12-bit window gets us 260K cycles, which is pretty insane if you think about it, because this means that on a high-end Optron, you can be doing 10,000 point multiplications a second in software. That's the typical thing you'd only see in hardware with RSA. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck and avoid buying expensive hardware with that. So graphs. So that one, I don't know how much you guys can read it, but it's going through all the different NIST curves with different window sizes. So from left to right is 192-bit all the way to 520-bit. And then in each group, it goes from a 4-bit window to a 12-bit window. So basically what you can take away from this, though, is that a 12-bit window will get you a very nice speed up. But unfortunately, next slide, the memory requirements for it are huge by comparison. So this is a log graph. And the 12-bit window usually takes about a megabyte of memory. So your typical embedded device will not like that. There's kind of a happy medium, it turns out, with, at least on the Optron, that an 8-bit window will give you average performance and average memory requirements. So quick wrap up. ECC is a fast way of doing public key crypto. Yeah, okay. Let me wrap up, please. It's a fast way of doing public key crypto. Super hard once you wrap your mind around working with points instead of scalars. There's patents you have to know about, like Apple has random patents on things. Certicom has patents on things. RSA probably has patents on ECC. But for the most part, if you stick along the lines of using NIST or Suite B, you're pretty much safe. Yeah, I was listening. My Winamp jumped onto YouTube while I was writing these slides, okay? But the standards are kind of a mess, so it's good to get on top of it. The ANSI standards are what you'd want to be looking at, because that's what NIST defers to when they say, let's do DSS with ECC curves, ECC crypto. They're going to say use ECDSA or whatever else. Certicom is really reaching, so don't do business with them. If anyone here from Certicom, got to talk with you. Their standard tactic is, if anyone's been to ECCCon in, I think it's in Toronto, their standard tactic is just to scare people with saying, oh, we have all these patents and technology, and we're the gods with ECC. And the truth is no. I mean, I wrote this stuff for fun. Like, this is what I do after I come home from work. And I have, fast point multiplications, and this is used in real embedded systems and what have not. So why do you have to deal with Certicom? It's beyond me. The Suite B stuff, ANSI stuff is home free. Fixed point is hella fast. If anyone wants to talk to me about it after the talk, I know that the slides weren't quite well prepared for this size room, but I'd be glad to explain it. The source code's there too, so libtomcrypt.com has these projects. The code's public domain, it's well commented. And I also take bug fixes and stuff, so if you guys hack at it and find at least a dozen errors or so, give me a shout. And please stop using OpenSSL for generic crypto stuff. I hate seeing demos of crypto using OpenSSL. It's very annoying because that library is a pain to work with. And finally, questions, if anyone has any. Sure. Yeah. No, because the problem there is the table size grows way exceptionally large. It's linear increase in speed for exponential size and memory, so that's kind of a pain. You can play some tricks though. You can actually do some point compression on the points you have. For example, these are all going to be projective points, x, y, z, right? It turns out you can map it back to a fine and save one coordinate and stuff like that, but for the most part it's exponential. And you can see that here. I mean, the 12 size is huge. I mean, this is a log-log graph, right? So the top line's 1,000,000 and the bottom line's 10,000. So, any other questions? Whoops. Buy my book. Yeah, sure, go for it, man. Rush job. I know, but if I went through the conclusion and all that stuff at my normal pace, it probably would have taken 10 minutes. And what? Yeah. Well, I didn't want to.
Unfortunately, something like this shouldn't be rushed.
Yeah, I hate John Callis.